put this starting slide. All right. All right, we'll just give everyone a few minutes to join. As you are coming in, just take a moment to drop a note in the Zoom chat. What's your name? Where are you calling in from? And one thing you're looking forward to this week or weekend. We'll get started in a few minutes. All right, I see people are still trickling in, but we can get started and then people will join. So hi, everyone, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here for this Lead Time Live panel on prioritizing and tracking progress towards goals. Lead Time Live is brought to you by Range, a tool for better remote teamwork. And I'm Jean, your host and the VP of Engineering here at Range. Today's panel is all about prioritizing and tracking progress towards your goals instead of completely forgetting about our goals and only checking back in on them at the end of the quarter. And it's, almost, I guess, 2/3 of the way through Q1. So this may be a very timely topic where you're either, wow, I'm doing great, I'm tracking against the goals that I set at the beginning of the year, or you may be like, oh, I totally forgot what our annual goals are or our quarterly goals are. So we'll be talking all about that today. This panel will last for about an hour, and I'll try to reserve some time at the end for Q&A. But also, if you have any questions that are relevant to what we're currently talking about, just drop them in the chat and then I'll include them. Cool, well, let's get started. I'll be sharing my screen. Let me remove this slide. All right. Screen sharing. All right, so I'll be sharing my screen and we'll be running this panel through Range's meeting tool, which makes it super easy to facilitate and keep meetings and panels on track. Michael will be taking notes for us, and then that will also be sent out afterwards in a follow-up. All right, so I'd like to bring our panelists in. Michael, if you could spotlight them, that would be great. Awesome. All right, so what I like to do is to start these panels with an opening round. And our prompt today is to introduce yourself, share a little bit about yourself, and then to answer the prompt, do you consider yourself to be a goal-oriented person, and what does that mean to you? And also, when you introduce yourself, also share how you're doing today. All right, Mariah, you want to start us off?
Hi, I'm Mariah Hay. I am the Chief Experience Officer for Help Scout, which is customer support software for small and medium businesses, including software companies. Let's see, remind me again, what are the other items?
How are you doing today? And also, if you consider yourself to be a goal-oriented person and what that means to you.
Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm down here in Georgia. The sun is shining. It's starting to feel like spring is here. So that's feeling really good. Goal oriented. Well, I think I live and die by OKRs at work. So I would say yes. And I'm a little less structured in my personal life, but I do have kind of directional goals that I set for myself around things that I want to improve. So yeah.
Thank you. Welcome. I am Jean. I'm the VP of Engineering at Range. I'm a little like, I was a little scattered this morning because there was a lot of things going on. My daughter had like some leg pain, and it was kind of like a game time decision of whether or not she would go to school. But thankfully she is at school and not here. And I actually I was thinking about this question. I don't think I'm like a long-term goal-oriented person, but I think I can do things like, oh, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try not eating meat for like a month, or like, let me do this training for 2 weeks. So I guess I'm like a short-term goal-oriented person, but I would have not considered myself a goal-oriented person because I tend to think of that as like long-term goals, like people who have like 5-year or 10-year plans, which I definitely do not. Jen.
Hi, I'm Jen. I am one of the founders of Range, which makes this lovely meeting tool that you can see, and we make other tools for remote teams. I'm going to out Jean briefly, which is that she just ran a half marathon. So I think that counts as a goal. But I am doing pretty well today. Also, it's very sunny here in Colorado, which is kind of the standard. So kind of enjoying the weather. Goal oriented, I'd say I'm kind of in between. I don't often feel very motivated by like trying to achieve something like large, but something like a daily change in habits. That's something I would like focus on and probably do more regularly. Like I want to try to walk for 30 minutes, several days a week, things like that are kind of more habitual. But I swam in high school, and I was very not competitive because wasn't very good at setting goals. I'd be like, I'll just swim. It's okay. And that, I swam, but I didn't win. So yeah, I think I'm kind of in between on that stage.
Nice. Oh, lots of swimmers. All right, Natalie.
Hey everyone, I'm Natalie. I am feeling slightly warm today and a little bit dehydrated, and I'm wishing I brought water here in this little room I'm in, but I'll get it soon. And I consider myself to be a recovering goal-oriented person. And I've sort of reframed this as being more like chameleon-oriented. I think that I sort of look at what I think a situation needs, and then I like try to decide if it needs goals or if it needs process or if it needs neither. And so that's part of my recovery plan, is to have like a moment before setting a goal to say like, why am I setting a goal? To check in with myself for that.
Oh, thanks, Natalie. All right, so let's dive right in. I was thinking we could start with kind of goal struggles, because I feel like it's very relatable. It's March 2nd. Somehow it is March already, even though it's felt like a long time, but it's also surprising that it's March. And I think it's very relatable that people are like, oh, we spend weeks at the end of the year setting annual goals, and then by the time February rolls around, like no one remembers what they are, or like we set OKRs and we check in on them at the end of the quarter, but in between there's not a lot of like checking in with these goals. So I guess just to start, like what are the common struggles that teams face when they are setting and tracking progress towards goals? Natalie, I was hoping you could start us off.
Yeah, sure, happy to. This is so cool seeing this tool. I've never seen it before. So I'm like, wow, I'm a topic owner. How exciting. So I think of this, and I'm sure as I keep going in my career, I'll have like other categories to add to the list of struggles, but I kind of see them in two main categories. One are like the goals themselves. Like, are these the right goals? How do we decide these goals? How are we determining whether we're succeeding in these goals? All of the what kind of stuff. And then there's the other category is kind of like the emotional aspect of trying to work on your goals individually and in collaboration with others. And I think that there are struggles almost all the time in both categories for everyone ongoingly. And so we can kind of parse what I see in those two categories. So on the actual goal side of things, I think there's a couple that are top of mind. One is, I think often we set goals that are disconnected to a why or a strategy, and it's very easy to forget about why we're doing it in the first place. And so you set this goal and then you kind of forget about the motivation or the reason behind it all the time. It's very easy to do that. You only have to look as far as why you walked into the kitchen and you forgot to realize that this is happening at every level of our brain functioning all the time. So I think that's one, is just disconnection from the why and constantly needing to remind ourselves of that. And so when we're setting goals, making sure we're making that link explicit and regularly coming back to it, I think is really critical. I think another one on the kind of goal what side of things is stating a goal, but not really having a clear, believable path to achieving it. So we're
lofty goals,
aspirational
goals. Yeah.
Very aspirational, but and that kind of is maybe a direct tie to the other category of the emotional side. But even if you take out the emotions to say okay, I want to run a half marathon, for example, it's wishful thinking to assume that if I did nothing to prepare for that, that I would just be able to just show up on the day and do it, unless I've already, trained for many years to do that. And I may be saying this out of personal experience. I would very much not recommend showing up to a half marathon without having trained for it. So I think that's a second piece, is just creating a clear, believable path towards the thing that we want to do, towards that main goal. Take some time to actually carve that out, articulate it. And then sometimes when you look at it, you're that's intimidating, right? Realizing all the steps you have to take. And sometimes for other people, that's actually really relieving to be able to be oh, okay, all I have to focus on is the next lily pad. That's also in the kind of goals what category. And then I say the last one that I'll state there's probably gazillions, is kind of an obsession with outcomes. And I recently wrote this piece with Ravi Mehta on the Reforge blog about goal setting and some of these struggles. And we kind of presented this 4-part goal, types of goal framework that I think was so helpful for me even to just articulate with Ravi as we were writing. But when I say people are obsessed with outcomes, what I mean is I've seen and proposed myself 1,000 goals that are improve retention by 57%. And then there's no why are we doing that? There's no clear path for how to get there. And then there's also the outcome itself is you must achieve 57% improvement with retention, which is just never going to happen. But instead, I think there's 4 different types of goals that you can set that are based off of kind of the right moment in product development or in personal development, that are do you need to set a goal to figure out what you should do? Do you need to set a goal to figure out how you should do it? Oh, hi, kitty. That was so pretty. Or do you need to set a goal to measure that what you've done has actually made a difference? And so I think when I say obsession with outcomes, I'm talking about an over indexing on a certain type of goal that we've sort of put on a pedestal, I think, and has grown increasingly popular, but we haven't really questioned why are we so into those types of goals as meaningful units of progress. So I've already been talking a lot, so that's the what category of struggles. I feel like I'd love to pass it off to someone else to add in or chime in on.
Yeah, Mariah or Jen, anything to add here with common struggles?
As you were talking, Natalie, I was thinking there's also something that happens within software development where people are given goals and they don't actually have the autonomy and they don't feel accountable to them necessarily. They're just building what they're told to build. And so I think that unless a team feels like they have ownership of goals and they have autonomy to approach things in different ways, you either have the goal of build this thing and ship it, or actually meet this metric. And I think those are very different motions.
Yeah, it got me thinking when you said, I think something about reality. And this idea that goals are often like very disconnected from the day-to-day work that teams are doing. And so I think building on what Mariah was saying, like that means that the goals are given to the team. They're not like actually informed by some of that day-to-day work, but then they also feel like this thing that's on top of your other work of like, okay, well, we've got to hit that 57% goal and keep all the other systems running. And so I think the biggest thing that comes up for me is just like the reality check needed for many goals of like, part of it is like, if you set your goal too broad, cool, that's fine, but it's going to take 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks to actually narrow it down to what you need to do. So like factor that into your goal timeline, like just the reality of like what it takes to achieve a goal. I think, it often gets, I guess, overlooked by both leadership and sometimes by the team itself, as you like think about your own work. I've certainly set goals where I'm like, oh, I'm gonna like send out this doc like 2 days from now, and in reality, there are like 14 steps before I can send that doc out. So it's like, cool, that goal is unrealistic. So I think a lot about just like the reality and giving ourselves permission to connect day-to-day work and that kind of information back with goals.
Natalie, you also mentioned sort of like making sure people know the why. And one thing that I've seen, and I've definitely fallen in this trap as well, is like a lot of times if it's like more of a company goal or top-down goal, a lot of times the people at the level that they're setting the goals, they may know why, but there's like gaps that occur every layer down. And so like by the time you get to the people actually doing like the IC work, like they may not really understand. So even just taking a look at the goals with the lens of like, okay, if I were someone doing this work, like, would I understand why without having the context of being in all the like executive and like alignment meetings?
I think that's totally right. And I think that we kind of deceive ourselves in thinking that when people, especially when there's power involved, which there always is, whether we want to be honest about it or not, when there's power involved, I think we deceive ourselves in thinking that people who are on the receiving end of goals have like the confidence, the clarity, the pizzazz, and the ability to say, you know, Jean, I really feel like you set that goal, but I don't understand the context for why you set it. And I'm feeling a little bit nervous about how feasible it is. And so I think we end up in a trap where we overly rely on communication that's actually quite difficult for people to step up and do. And so we do a disservice to people in the creation process of the goals, because then those people end up taking on more of a burden of how should I talk about the fact that I'm actually not feeling very good about this goal, or I'm feeling nervous about it, or what are the consequences of not hitting it for myself personally or for our team. And I think that has a ton of cascading negative implications that are very hard to notice in real time, but over time compound. So
we have a question from the chat around hearing about experiences around goal changes before original goals were reached and how the team has approached or handled that in the past. So I think this is about figuring out, is this around, I think, setting original goals, or actually maybe we can get some clarification in the chat and come back.
It sounds like it might be like moving goalposts, like suddenly like you're shooting towards one goal and you're not there yet.
I see.
And then it shifts, which I think, yeah, it's interesting to think about like how you manage that conversation with like leadership who might be changing that goalpost and kind of setting expectations of like, earlier today we were talking about steering ships, and I feel like it does take time to like move and turn the ship, and like letting folks know that, because sometimes I think, to echo what Natalie was saying, like we deceive ourselves and think like, oh, we just tell the team and suddenly they're there. But a lot of times there's been like months of conversation about why you're moving the goalpost on your alignment or senior leadership team, but the rest of the company doesn't have that, because you don't want to necessarily rock the boat, to continue the nautical metaphor. Yeah, I think there's some like conversation and reality check you can provide there as a leader, and then helping the team get some of that context about like why the goals are changing.
Yeah.
I switched to this other topic. Go ahead, Mariah. Yeah.
To kind of build on top of what you were talking about, Jen, there's another situation that we have. So when I started with my current team company, I've been there for about 2 years. The goal setting was the laundry list of stuff to go do. What I was trying to do is get people to look at it more as objectives we're trying to hit and key results that we know like indicate that we've hit it. And as a third appendage to that, we now put a list of like work we think it includes, but we're not like holding ourselves to that. It's just the hypothesis that we use to share internally. And so both at the executive level, when we're setting company level OKRs, and at the team level, we give people full permission to change things if they see things that lead them to believe those aren't the right goals. So
That's cool.
to the point earlier of sometimes it takes a couple of weeks once you get into it or get into discovery and you're like, oh, this isn't the right thing. So that's the first thing, we give ourselves permission. And those are the goals that we're in charge of ourselves. And the second one is if there's like a top-down approach of, oh, this market condition has changed and we have to like hit the brakes, pencils down on this and like do this other thing. I've tried to work very hard to reduce that behavior and go, is it really that important? Or is it the next thing like a quarter out, and get people in the mindset where they're looking a quarter or two out to like the next goal setting range instead of having to like throw the handbrake. If there is a handbrake throwing moment, we have a ton of exploration around what does this displace? What does the team recommend? Knowing that we're trying to handle it, like who might work on this? So we just try to create a lot of clarity there and actually collaborate with the people that it would impact potentially on like, what do they think is the best way to approach this?
I like that you call it a handbrake moment. Although if there were a nautical reference, I think that would be slightly more thematic. But yeah, it kind of acknowledges that it is disruptive and jarring to the team, right? Which I think a lot of times company leadership does not really acknowledge that. And like even within the 2-week cycle might be like, oh, actually we want to work on this instead. It's like, no, wait till the next time. Like we already did our planning for this cycle.
Yeah.
Anything else to add here around moving goalposts, or, you know, whether it's that, you know, you get the goal is changing from like above, or if you're feeling like, hey, this is maybe not the right goal, like how do you make those adjustments, and what are some leading indicators that maybe it's not quite the right direction to go towards?
Like I have this like spidey sense where I'm like, this is not right with a goal, or like you keep trying to go do the work and talking to the team about it and you're like, why is this so hard? And I have come, I think, over time to just like start to listen to that feeling of like, usually there's like a hard period and you kind of move through it when you're getting a new work stream started, but sometimes you just like can't. And I find that like that's a signal to like revisit some of your inputs of like, okay, are we shooting towards the wrong thing? Are we approaching it in the wrong way? Like taking that time and noticing that when you're talking with folks in one-on-ones or like checking in on things, if there's like a continual pattern of like, no, I didn't quite do that. Like, I know I need to, like people trying, but it not quite working. And I think like listening to that, previously I kind of took it more personally and was like, oh, I just need to work harder. And now I'm like, okay, there's something with our goal that might be like off here.
Like if it feels too hard and it feels like it's a struggle at every point, like questioning why.
Or ask yourself if you're burned out, but you know, one thing or the other.
Is it me or is it the goal? We've got go ahead, Natalie.
I just was going to add that I think there's a big opportunity for both individuals and leaders to ask themselves the question of what personal and collective culture do we want to set around making adjustments to goals? Because on one side of the spectrum, you have, we should never be making adjustments, that's very bad. And on another side of the spectrum, you have, we just keep going, working on the wrong things and like should never pause them. And like neither of those is probably very good. And so somewhere in the gray space in the middle, I think is a question of like, what are the types of behaviors to like incentivize around adjustments to goals? And when I've been on the IC side, I've really appreciated when it's been made clear, like the scenarios in which people want me to step up and say, I think we need to do something different, versus the scenarios in which someone wants me to say, I think we need to push a little harder, or we need to understand why this deadline is so important, or we need to like, let's talk about why you're feeling this way. Like there's a lot of feelings that happen when people set goals. And I think that often the hurdle is just like recognizing how you're feeling about it and being able to work through that. Like, it feels terrible to feel like you can't accomplish a goal. And so people approach that in many different ways. We all have different strategies for that. Some start screaming and like, ah! And some of us are like, must work harder. Okay, I'm just going to keep pushing. And I have no judgment about either of those, but like, it's worth recognizing them. So I just wanted to add that there's nuance of like what valence we give to the idea of adjusting your goals, and that can easily cascade across an organization without ever having talked about it. So,
and as leaders, you have a lot of influence over, like for example, we had someone who we had something planned that we were going to work on, and then an engineer, I guess, met with the PM and designer and was like, and the outcome of that meeting was like, oh, actually, it's not worth it. We're actually not going to build this thing. And like, taking that opportunity to share that with the team, saying, hey, thanks for doing this. It's really great. We came out with this outcome that we actually don't need to build this, and we're going to focus on these other things instead. Like, finding ways to elevate those situations that shapes the culture and the expectations in your team. So we've got a question that I think is kind of related to this previous topic here. The question was around like, well, I guess there's a part of the question that's about like OKRs, a very American culture of OKRs where it feels like you're supposed to win every quarter. And that reminded me of this question we have around kind of contrived and meaningful progress. Like, when you're setting OKRs, like, do you set the things that you feel like are going to make you look good or actually meaningful? Like, Natalie, I know you wrote a post about this, and I would love to get your thoughts and start us off.
Yeah, I think that actually this might be helpful with a metaphor. If I say, like, imagine being in a car and I'm like, here's the destination we're going to. And we're like, yeah, let's go there. And then we start driving. And we're like, well, we've clearly made progress because we started driving. Like, that feels a bit like contrived progress to me, that like the car is on, we're in the car, we're moving in the general direction of our destination. Like, great. And that's not bad progress, but I think because goals are often disconnected from the why the goal exists in the first place, and it's hard to remember that, it's hard to know if we're making progress against the why versus progress against the what. And so I think more meaningful progress needs definition in this car scenario. Like, maybe meaningful progress is, it could be a handful of things. It could be progress is arriving at the destination. It could be progress is identifying the roadblocks that are going to be on our way along the destination, which we can't know until we start it. It could be that meaningful progress is, let's see if we can get to the destination quickly or if it actually takes too long to get there. It could be like, let's get to the destination and see if it's all that it's cracked up to be or actually like a cool place to go. Or it could be like, let's try out our new electric vehicle and prove to ourselves that range and security is not a big issue, right? Like, all of those could be meaningful progress. And so it's not that there's one definition around it, but I think that teams, individuals, like, really should take should take a moment before starting something to really align on, okay, what is meaningful progress about this thing? Like, if we achieve it, will that mean we've made progress? And what kind of progress? And is that progress actually the progress we want to make? And I see a lot of conflicts around goals happen where people think meaningful progress has been made, and they could be totally right, but their denominator, so to speak, is just like completely different. They're like pointed towards different directions. So that's kind of how I imagine this thing, is just getting really clear on what that meaning is.
Mariah or Jen, anything to add here around maybe meaningful goals, or how to help teams set meaningful goals and not just like goals that keep them busy driving in some direction?
That's a great question. It's funny. So we introduced objectives and key results as a goal setting strategy about 1.5 years ago into our org. And about 6 months ago, I wanted to check in with all the teams and say, you've been doing this for a year. What's going well? What's not going well? What do we need to change? what was going well is it got everybody going in the same direction. Everybody was a lot clearer. They were having better conversations about what they were collectively working on. We limited work in progress, so we don't have 4 people working on 4 different things. We're mobbing around problems. But on the flip side, there was a lot of consternation around, so we were just using spreadsheets and had like, every week the team would check in and go, is this red? Is it yellow? Is it green? And people, that was just really flipping people out because they're like, well, why? And, you know, what if it's 70%? What if it's 80%? And I said, look, at the end of the day, all I want you to do with these colors is have a conversation around, do we feel like we're making the progress that we want to be making in the time that we thought we would be able to make it? That's green. If we think that that's at risk and maybe the timeline is like not aligned with what we think we're going to do, then that's a yellow. And that's a signal that you might go, are we okay with that? Are we not okay with that? Do we need to engage another team and connect with them now? Or do we need to talk to a leader? And if it's red, it's a clear signal that we need to communicate, this is not happening, and talk to the people who care that it's not happening about. And so it's not a personal delineation of like, you did a good job or you did a bad job, but you're right. Culturally in America, we have that good job, bad job mentality of winning or losing. And so that's one of the biggest things that we've struggled with.
I think one of the things that's interesting, we've talked a lot about like negatives of goals, but like we all do them. And I think like part of the reason is like alignment is fun, like being in the car driving towards the destination, or like all working on a team, being like we are in sync, we know where we're going and what we're trying to do, and the like corporate word, but synergies that creates is like really powerful and fun to be on a team that's like you feel like you really are like a you know, the sum is greater than the parts, like it really feels that way. And so I think one of the things that we've tried to acknowledge is like there's the goal or the line, the 57%, the like demarcation that you put, but it's like it's about the journey and like what you got along the way. And I think that was kind of what you were saying when driving, but it was interesting. We are focused a lot on kind of revenue growth right now, and we are doing a lot with like one very scrappy teammate. And so we like, you know, we're like slightly below the like line we drawn in the sand, and we all had to like be like, wait, no, we're doing awesome. This is great. The fact that we're able to get anywhere close to this goal with like part-time, like founder time and like one teammate is like phenomenal. And it was very easy for us to like forget that because of like, we didn't hit the line drawn in the sand. So yeah, there's something there around like thinking about the journey and like the growth that happens along the way, and why we do goals, like why it's fun to have that thing to work towards.
I also appreciate the clarification of like being clear about what that green, yellow, and red means, right? Because you could imagine being right under that line, being like, oh, that's a yellow. Everyone just feels like, we failed, right? Like we're not green, but actually like we're doing awesome, right? Like kind of like, and even if it's green, there could still be things to improve on. If it's yellow, it's more of a like, hey, let's have this conversation rather than like, oh, we didn't hit it. Like, you know, we failed this quarter. I think this might be a good opportunity to go into more tactics. So kind of approaches, tools, mentalities. I know there's different frameworks for tools. Natalie, you shared one earlier. Like what do you feel like is needed or useful for teams to set meaningful goals and track progress towards them? It's a pretty big topic, so maybe just like one or two tactical things.
Sorry, Jean, did you call on me first?
Oh no, sorry, I didn't call on anyone, but I'll start with Jen.
Because I was going to say I'm not the topic owner, so please.
I thought you said someone else's name, so I was like, okay, it's not me.
We can add a spinner if everyone wants to.
So
but Jen, why don't you start? Yeah.
A few like simple things. This is going to sound patronizing, but write the goal down. somewhere. Like it could be in a document, it could be in a spreadsheet, it could be in Range, which I'll show you how that works a little bit later. But like having the goal written down, one, forces clarity of like what is the goal, and then allows other folks to react and engage with it on a regular basis. And then once it's written down, having ways to actually resurface that information on a regular basis, and help connect that to day-to-day work. So whether that day-to-day work is tracked in kind of a project management software, or you're sharing it in stand-ups or a tool like Range, like having a way where you're actually bringing that goal as a reminder in and connecting it back to the day-to-day work someone's doing helps, like, I guess on the one side create accountability, but on the other side, like helps you find purpose in your work. Like sometimes we're doing very rote tasks that are not super enjoyable or inspiring. And the reason they feel meaningful is because they are getting us closer towards that destination or towards what we are trying to achieve together. And so actually bringing that back into the day to day, I think a common mistake is that we talk about goals once a quarter or even once a month, like frequently. And that really isn't enough to actually have the team feel like it's a part of their day to day experience. So we think a lot about kind of like writing the goal down and then connecting it back to the day to day work that the team is doing.
Mariah or Natalie, any thoughts on kind of what's most important here?
Big +1 to to the writing it down and the reviewing. There was a note in the chat that asked about frequency recommendations, and I encourage our cross-functional experience teams, which are your engineers, your product manager, your product designer, you look at your OKRs together once a week. Like I work in a company that's fully remote. It always has been for the last 12 years. The company has been in existence, and having once in a while, having that weekly synchronous touch point, or even some teams do an async stand up, but making sure you're looking at it and having that discussion together keeps it top of mind. And I do the same thing with the leadership team. So my leadership team is the leader of engineering, leader of product management, leader of design that report to me. And we do the same thing with our OKRs weekly.
It's like something important is like just the basics of writing it down and reviewing it, right? Like those seem basic, but I think a lot of people are not doing, especially the reviewing part, I think is sometimes overlooked.
We like, it's funny because I launched this at the company and then I failed to do it with my team for like a quarter or two of like getting in the habit of making the space and making it that priority. But if you don't do it, those aren't the things you'll necessarily focus on.
Yeah. All right, let's move to, I think we just talked about this a little bit, kind of the frequency of checking in and some of the tactics. Does anyone else have anything else to add here around what this looks like on your team specifically?
So on our team, we have, so we're a small startup, so we're 12, almost 13 people. So we have kind of the company all hands. And so we have some goals that are, company-wide and some that are more team specific. And so every other week, which is basically like our sprint or cycle cadence of 2 weeks, we share kind of updates on company metrics, which kind of align with the goals. And then we also share updates from each team about kind of like work in progress, which are a little bit different. Usually metrics are more like retroactive of like kind of what happened. And then when we look at each team, we start to kind of break out and check in on the specific goals or kind of dashboards that we have for those teams. Something I think that we recently learned to do, don't judge us too harshly, is have very clear metrics and follow-ups from big efforts. So sometimes you have the goal and you're trying to move the like very top metric of like total signups or bugs or things like that, kind of the end goal, but there's earlier metrics that you can see that you're moving that have kind of give you signal. And so we've started to have a better sense and a cadence of, after a launch, checking in on like the specific metrics that launch might move versus the overall goal. And that has been helpful to, one, give the team immediate feedback of like, cool, is this working, and build that momentum, but also give us a sense in between kind of the time lag that can happen with larger metrics of what's happening there.
I think that also, like, just like taking a step back, there's also the requirement of just like making sure if you have a metric that you're trying to move as a goal, making sure you're tracking the right things. Like before you embark on that like change, making sure you're tracking the right things, making sure you have the dashboard set up. Again, all kind of like pretty basic things, but I think the like setting the goal, reviewing the goal, writing it down somewhere, making sure you're tracking the things, making sure that you have the dashboard set up so you can see progress, all are very important.
Yeah. I'm happy to speak to the question in the chat around, the question was, in that weekly discussion, do you tend to focus on walking through the goals, walking through the metrics, progress on the goals? What kind of conversation usually breaks out of those discussions? I know that on the cross-functional experience team level, mostly that team is just looking at the goals and going, are we feeling red, yellow, or green about each of them? Sometimes certain ones will have owners, like a person in the team that's kind of like the one that's working the most on it or tracking to it, and they might be the person that speaks up about it. Teams usually are only looking at the metrics of things that they are about to deliver on and things they have just delivered. The things they've just delivered, they care about looking at the metrics to see if it's succeeding in what they created. So that's kind of your I'm losing the word that I was looking for. Behavior that happens after you go ahead and ship. And then they also are talking about the metrics of the thing that, like, if it's something that they're rebuilding or changing, they want to like look at the baseline metrics and go, what are we trying to move it to? And so those kind of conversations will come up. Usually the PM leads that. And then what the breakout conversation that comes out of those discussions usually are a couple things. One, coordinating with another team because it's a larger project and you might be blocked by somebody else. And so trying to unblock those things. And two, if it's like yellow or red and you decide like, no, we really need to hit this deadline because we've got a big marketing effort we need to coordinate with, they might come to their engineering coach, which is our engineering manager, or myself, and go, we could really use another pair of hands because we're at risk for this and we know we've got this tight coordination going. So those are the kinds of things that usually come out of those conversations. In addition to that, one new thing the teams have started experimenting with are personal goals for the week. Not all teams do this, and but people have started saying, hey, I'm going to get clear on my personal goals and share those, just so everybody on the team is really hyper aware of what different people are working on if they're not like pair programming on something.
That's been a big key for us, is folks sharing what they're working on a daily or every few day basis of like, here's what we're shooting towards. And that way other people have the permission to be like, how's it going? Which is harder sometimes if you haven't shared it proactively.
Instead of what are you working on?
Always a good moment.
What's going on over there? Cool. We're going to take a short detour. Jen is going to share a little bit about Range and our goals tool. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then after that, we'll come back and close out the panel. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Jen.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'll also, as we kind of go through this, give a little bit of context on how, sorry, my cat has joined this webinar, give some context on how Range operates and how we run some of our kind of goal processes. So I'm going to share my screen. For those of you who aren't familiar, Range is a SaaS platform. So we help companies run remote teams, particularly improving kind of the connection and information sharing that happens on those teams. So it really feels like you can be the best possible team no matter where you're located. So I'm going to show you the kind of keystone of Range, which is the check-in. And the check-in at Range is really about a daily habit of sharing your work. And don't worry, I'm going to get to goals, but it's helpful to understand kind of this process of checking in and sharing, because as we've been talking about, that act of sharing your work and letting other knows what you're shooting towards can be really helpful. Can everyone see my screen? Awesome. So this is lovely Range. We did a redesign a little bit ago, and I've just still love the design. I'm not biased at all. So when you start with Range, you can think about it as your kind of like personal planner to start the day. You start off with checking in about how you're feeling, because that really determines a lot of what you're going to be able to do in any given day. And it helps give your team some context on whether they should bug you about things or not, or offer support. So you select an emoji and a green, yellow, red color. Red usually signifies like I'm just kind of hear a name only, having a really rough time. Yellow, I'm a little bit, exhausted or tired or something's going on. And green is just like, I'm good to go. So I'm enjoying our webinar, so I'm feeling pretty green today. Then I go into a section that's around planning and what's happened. And this is something that everyone on a team would do. And you could do it daily, you could do it 2 days a week or once a week. And it's really about setting your plans for the day and for the week. And you want to take a few minutes to just kind of plan that. And at the end of the moment, you will actually answer a team building question, which is around connecting with your team. This question is around a series of unfortunate events on vacation. So I've shared a bit about a trip to Patagonia I took where I foolishly tried to backpack up a mountain and then it snowed. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And attached a photo here to share with the team. Now, this check-in moment is really about providing a baseline for the team of sharing their work. And the reason that matters for goal tracking is one of the big problems around goals is the disconnect with your day-to-day work and the tiresome habit of having to go and update a leader every quarter or once a month about the goal progress and it feeling really separate from your rest of your work. So with Range, when you share a check-in, it gets shared out with your team. You can see our team is still kind of just getting the day started on the West Coast, but it also sends this information to our goal tracking software. So within Range, goals are really a tool specifically designed for teams. So Range isn't really meant to compete to replace a tool that's for company OKRs. It's really about the team experience. So that spreadsheet or that doc where you're rating things red, yellow, green, this is meant to replace that and make that easier for the team to engage with. So you can see some of our company goals here. I'll click into one, our adoption goal, which is a goal by our product development team. And you can see that we've got kind of a very simple description. So I want to keep this super lightweight. The intent isn't for the goal to be a novel that you wrote, but you might link to a document or something that allows you to give a little bit more context. And as you scroll down, you can see there's a very lightweight status update where you can share progress on the goal. You can assign that on track, at risk, behind setting, similar to how you might in a spreadsheet. And you can choose a very basic metric. So this is meant to stay simple and make it really easy for a leader or a teammate to update. Now, what gets really powerful here is as someone's sharing those check-ins on their day-to-day work, they can use hashtags to connect that daily work to a goal. Just like on social media, we borrowed it directly from Twitter. So you can see here, this goal has a hashtag called adoption that connects to this goal. And what that means is that I can actually go in and see the day-to-day work that's happening on this project without messaging anybody. They are just sharing that as part of their daily stand-up or their daily check-in, depending on how their team works. And because of that, I, as a leader, can go and get strong information about what's happening without micromanaging or nudging. This also makes it really easy for a manager to write up a summary update from this information about the overall status. You can also see the related documents here, as well as other goals associated with this project or this OKR. So this is meant to be a really lightweight place for a leader to come and track their goal. And then when you're inevitably another leader or another team asks the progress on this goal, you can actually just share the link and send them to this page and have them see all of the updates live. This information can also go out to Slack directly so that folks can see this information without having a Range account. And that is how goals work in Range. And happy to share more information or follow up with folks who are interested.
Thanks, Jen. I think Michael's going to drop a link in the chat, and you can use that to sign up and get a free trial as well if you want to try it out. And we'll include the link in the follow-up emails as well. All right, so let's move back into our closing round. Where's my meeting? Okay. All right, so I like to close out meetings and panels with closing round. We've got our nice spinner again. And I would actually invite everyone who's in the chat as well to share something in the chat that something that's clear to you now about goals, and maybe one thing that you'd like to do differently with your team, something you'd like to try. You can do that now or after our closing as well. So for the panelists, I'd love to hear, like, maybe this is a tip that you've already shared, but for teams looking to really, strengthen their habit of checking in on or sharing goals progress, what's like one tactical thing they could try or start with? We'll start with Natalie.
So one thing I would start with is understand how people are feeling about the goal. I think it's really easy to move into like, okay, what are we going to do first and how are we going to do it and who's responsible for what? But I think people have lots of feelings and certainly about goals, especially if they're accountable to them. And so even asking for 5 minutes at the start of your check-ins, how are we feeling about our goals? What's shifted? What insights do you have that might relate to this goal? Does this feel motivating or like you're whipping yourself? Is really important.
Thanks, Natalie. Jen.
Yeah, I think my suggestion, assuming you have a goal set, is start checking in on it at your weekly team meeting and see what happens. Like, just add a topic. Don't feel like you have to like over prepare or it's some like book you need to share. Just be like, cool, how's progress going on this goal? And if it's like total crickets, that's information of like, cool, we are not really working on that right now. But I think that'll start to build the habit of checking in regularly. And then you can start to integrate it into other touch points, like your kind of daily stand-ups or things like that.
My tip is to think about like kind of like stitching together the why. So thinking about, okay, if I were to communicate this goal to this team or this engineer, like, would they be able to understand how this maps up to what the company needs, right? And if not, then it may need a little bit more context or framing and just kind of trying to put yourself in that person's shoes because they don't have all the context that you have. And Mariah.
To build on what you said, Jean, clear is kind. And so I think one of the hardest things with goal setting is people speaking up when they don't understand everything. And so I would be like, do we trust each other and ourselves enough to be like vulnerable and open about discussing goals and like digging in when we don't understand and raising our hand when we don't understand? And if you can get to the team to a place where they feel really comfortable in being vulnerable and talking about things, that communication will help like soothe all ills as you kind of move through a project in pursuit of the goals, because everybody feels like they can discuss them and get on the same page if they're not there already.
Yeah, that's great. It actually reminds me of like, I think as leaders, one of the most important things we can do is to model that behavior for other people. Like I recently kept seeing this acronym CRO, and I was like, I think that means Chief Revenue Officer, but I think it's being used as something else. Like I probably should know this because I'm in all these meetings where it's being used. But I was like, I'm just going to ask on Slack and be like, this is probably something I should know. I think it means Chief Revenue Officer, but is it something else? And it was like conversion rate optimization, which is also very related. So very confusing, but I'm glad I asked it. And maybe like, maybe other people were also wondering what it meant. So not necessarily related to goals, but just as a reminder, if you're a leader at your organization, you have the ability to influence and create a culture where people can ask questions if they're unsure. Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this panel, and for everyone who's here in the webinar, we'll be sending out some emails with the meeting notes. We'll also include the recording once it's processed, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Jean.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.